Hot Diggity. Was that an episode of the Doom Patrol or The Shining? Honestly, I don't think there's any way to make Hot Diggity sound cool, but I tried. DC Universe's Doom Patrol, Season 1, Episode 6, Review and Breakdown. Hey Twisted people, it's your Twisted Girl next door here, and today I am doing a review and breakdown of DC Universe's Doom Patrol, Season 1, Episode 6. So, if you're new here, this is the way it goes. I do my overall thoughts of the episode, the happenings, as in what happened in the episode, and my thoughts on that. Ship talk, because I do like talking about relationships. Predictions, because I'll take a guess even if I'm usually wrong. And finally, because Doom Patrol is based off of the comic book characters, I do comic book talk. And there were a lot of comic book references in this particular episode, so stick around for that. Overall, this had to be my favorite episode of the season so far. Like, oh my gosh. I think maybe I'm a little biased because I tend to be a real big horror addict, but this episode was so good and so horror-filled and terror-filled, and there were revelations, and it just all totally worked. And just like Larry actually mentioned that they felt like they were in the movie The Shining, that's definitely the vibe I got, and it worked so well. I just love how this show mixes and matches so much of the history of the over 20 years or so of history of the Doom Patrol to make a cohesive plot that's totally new and different from the comic books itself. So it makes it new for comic book readers and also fun for those who are new to it, who want to dig into the comic books and also just maybe don't want to dig into the comic books. So it's new for us and we don't feel like we're necessarily missing out on anything as well. So overall, this was just such a great episode and by far my favorite so far. The old Doom Patrol. Okay, so basically this episode takes place like pretty much like a day or two after the last episode took place, where Jane is trying to dig into what Mr. Nobody whispered in her ear like years ago, which was the Doom Patrol and what that meant. Now, last episode, I thought that just meant him trying to push for them to form as the Doom Patrol, but it's actually, the meaning was that there was an old Doom Patrol. So with the help of Vic, Cyborg, and Cliff basically just sitting by, Jane finds out through going through Chief's old archives about the Doom Patrol, the old Doom Patrol, which was a small band of superheroes headed by Chief that basically disappeared back in the 1950s. We find out that Rita had an old flame romance with Steve Mentos, who was Steve Dayton, who goes by Mentos, who was in the old Doom Patrol. So this sparks Jane to basically teleport her, Rita, and Larry to the last place where the old Doom Patrol was seen. And what looks like straight out of an X-Men comic books, we find the old Doom Patrol seemingly heading up a school for mutants. And there we meet the old Doom Patrol, which is Steve Dayton, aka Mentos, Arani, and also Rhea, with who seemingly comes off as the head schoolmaster, Josh, in the office as well. Jane and Josh go into the office where Jane tries to ask more about Chief, and Arani and Larry basically go off where Arani is showing Larry around the mansion, while Steve and Rita have their own little excursion in the trophy room of Steve. Throughout this episode and this main plot, we get flashbacks of Rita's plot line, which I was so happy to see. So we get flashbacks of Rita's plot line of her being on the casting couch with that head honcho of Hollywood, Bloom, and she basically kills him by turning into a blob and smothering him. And kudos, the hero of that segment was the administrative assistant, aka the receptionist, who basically just thinks he has a heart attack and covers for her, which pretty much just shows you how slimy and shady the old school Hollywood could be with the casting couch, and probably is just as shady today. Who knows? Anyway, I digress. But that was a flashback that we got. We also throughout this get flashbacks of Rita and Mentos, blossoming love affair, and also how Rita meets Chief for the first time as well. With Larry and Arani, we find out, or at least we're told from Arani, that her and Chief were actually married. Like, oh my gosh. Larry, of course, says, yo, you were never, like, mentioned ever by the Chief. But then Arani says something kind of truthful, which is basically the Chief now has a lot of his secrets, right? And you find out a lot of stuff that you didn't know about. So we're seemingly like told that he had a wife that we did not know about, and neither did the current Doom Patrol. Josh is basically trying to get Jane to leave. He's, telling her there's no use for her here, you need to go. But he does show Jane a room that he assumed was hers because he thought that Chief was sending her there as well, which comes back into play later on in the episode. Eventually, the crap hits the fan as Rita breaks the facade of Steve's illusion, which we find out is basically an illusion. And all of this comes about when they're told about how the old Doom Patrol basically fought with Mr. Nobody, which has different, of course, which is a totally crazy story. Like, it's just nuts, the story that comes about. And when Rita basically tells him that Mr. Nobody was not defeated, that breaks Steve. And then it is revealed that everything that we thought in the beginning of this episode was not at all what it was. AKA, it turns into a straight up horror movie, which I loved. So basically, when everything hits the fan, we also see many nightmares or illusions, like dark illusions of Steve basically getting into the fears of all the other current Doom Patrol. And so we see this thing with Larry and some guy with needles for hands and fingers, basically saying, are you ready to complete the mission? Which was like, what was that? Also, we see a thing with Rita and a character named Mary Beth, and we hear the cries of a baby, which we heard some episodes ago associated with Rita. And we basically watch Mary Beth kill herself in front of Rita, which is like, what was that about? And then finally with Jane, there's something with some menacing puzzle pieces and a hand that comes out and like grabs her or something, and she's really freaked out by it. So all of this keeps going until the negative energy within Larry is like, screw whatever's going on here, and jumps out of Larry's body and pretty much takes Mentos' helmet off, which he uses for his powers to stop all the nightmarish illusions. What is eventually revealed is that the old Doom Patrol did not actually beat Mr. Nobody. In fact, they all went crazy because Mr. Nobody broke them, and pretty much that place where they're visiting right now isn't actually a school, but pretty much like a home for broken heroes that now set up to basically keep them there. And Josh serves as somewhat of their babysitter or their caregiver, I should say, and giving them their medication and whatnot, and allowing Steve to basically create a group delusion for all of them so they can be somewhat happy and stop torturing themselves constantly. Rita also steps in to help restore the group delusion so that they don't have to continue to torture themselves, which was kind of nice of her. In the midst of this, Jane questions Josh and thinking, wait a minute, was Niles going to send me here? And somewhat, feeling animosity towards Chief. And in that moment, Josh basically tells her, look, this is what Mr. Nobody probably wanted you to see because he wants to turn you against Niles, so don't let him do it. Okay, so that whole A-plot was crazy and awesome and intense, and I loved it. I friggin' loved it. So one aspect of this I really liked was digging deeper into Niles' Chief's history, because he's a mystery, right? That rhymed. Oh my gosh. But yes, he's a big mysterious figure, which is very similar in a way to some versions of him in the comic books, which I'll get into in a little bit. So it was kind of interesting to see, one, he already had a cluster of superheroes who were around him who he helped, and basically that went really bad. We find out that it was like a government program that was eventually abandoned, but he kind of kept with it. Rita and Larry's history was also, once again, it's being teased out, and I'm just ready for it. I mean, this whole thing with Rita, I didn't know what that thing was with Mary Beth. I was like, what? Who? What is going on here exactly? I want to know more about that. And also with Larry's situation, something tells me that it wasn't just some freak accident when it came to the energy getting inside of him, and that it may have been something a lot deeper in terms of what he was actually a part of in terms of some government program. So they teased at that, and now I want to know more about that as well. Also, that whole Mr. Nobody hot diggity sequence was hilarious and haunting and creeped me out. that I will never think of that song the same way again. I don't think I ever thought of that song before this episode, to be honest with you. And now it will forever be emblazoned in my mind. And overall, it was sad about the old Doom Patrol, and also kind of terrifying in the sense of, could that happen to the current Doom Patrol? I think that was more so what Mr. Nobody might have been trying to get at, in terms of just trying to dig into Chief's past and also show the current roster that this guy that you love and everything isn't as perfect as you think he is. Vic and his dad. So basically, Vic's dad comes to repair Vic, after that explosion and whatnot that happened. And they still have some animosity. And Vic's dad, Silas, is pretty much like, why are you still here? And we also find out that Silas and Chief didn't get along very well after a bit. They used to work together, but Silas basically, in telling us about Chief, or telling Cliff about Chief, is saying that Chief is a stubborn man and is archaic in the terms of how he goes about inventions and technology. Cliff and Silas also have something of a confrontation where, Cliff tells him, lay off your son a little bit. And seemingly, this affects Vic's father to give him space, which was interesting. So yeah, for like a day or so, Vic was in safety mode, but then Vic's dad takes it off and tells him, I'm going to let you be your own man for a little bit. That was a nice, interesting route that they took with that plot line. Like I said, like I've been saying for the past couple of episodes, I think Vic's dad is shady. I still think he's kind of shady in the sense of, I don't think he's telling Vic everything, but I think in the sense of Vic's dad really caring for Vic, I think that was showed in this episode. And if nothing else, you can't deny or doubt that he does love his son, even if he might have different kind of methods that aren't completely revealed to us. But it was a different route. I didn't think they were going to go that way. Do I totally trust that he gave Vic complete control? No. And interestingly enough, it was Cliff that helped out with that, because Cliff and Vic had been, basically being very antagonistic towards each other up to this moment. And so they kind of had a moment this episode to get closer, which was nice, because they're both the robotic people. Cliff and stalking his daughter on social media. So Cliff finds his daughter on the DC Universe's version of Facebook, which I think is called Facehole, interesting enough. And so he wants to friend request his daughter, and he doesn't know how to do it because he's like, what the heck is this? You have to remember, Cliff died, I think, back in the early 90s. So this is totally foreign to him. And even as a robot man, it's even more foreign to him at this point. So eventually Vic helps him out because Cliff helped him out. And so we find out that Cliff's daughter basically considers Cliff's old friend from his racing days her father. And we don't really know what that's about, but Cliff is mad. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I remember from the guy that was shown, I think his name was Bob or something, is that before Cliff had his accident, wasn't Cliff's wife kind of rubbing on him or something like that? So I don't know if they were alluding to the fact that maybe Cliff's daughter isn't really his biological daughter, or just the idea that this guy who was under Cliff back when he was a racing superstar is now his daughter's hero in a way. Rita and Mentos. Every time I say Mentos, I keep thinking about Mentos breath freshener, and I want to sing that song, Mentos freshness. Anyway, so they have a history together in the live action show, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in the comic books, because they actually are pretty much a consistent couple in the comic books, although it's a controversial, dysfunctional relationship in the comic books as well. And so what we got in the live action was that, they had this romance, and Mento basically abused his power by reading Rita's brain without her permission and found out about her secret. Now, he doesn't tell us her secret, of course, in the episode, but that was enough for him to be like, I don't want to be with you. No, girl. So whatever it is, it had to be pretty intense, but they pretty much broke up. And well, there doesn't seem to be any hope for them because of the fact simply that he's some old, broken man now, which is interesting that they took that route, right? Because like I mentioned in the comic book, he's kind of like her main love interest in the comic book series throughout the different versions of them. So it's interesting that they pretty much made that null and void in the live action. But overall, it was nice to see Rita a little bit more vulnerable, liking a guy, and also getting a glimpse into her question of intimacy, because that was something I did wonder, with her having that condition, how would she feel in being intimate, being naked with someone? And we got a glimpse of that as well. We also got a glimpse that she's able to overall control her mind and her body when she wants to. Chief and Arani. So will we ever find out if they were actually married or not? We won't know until Chief returns. And if someone possibly asks him. First and foremost, the old Doom Patrol, or aka the old Doom Patrol we saw in the live action, was actually the second Doom Patrol in the comic book series. More so, what I mean is Arani and Rhea and Josh were actually part of the second roster. The roster that we have with the current Doom Patrol, even though they don't call themselves now Doom Patrol yet in the live action, were actually the first ones in the comic books. And then seemingly they die in some sort of explosion. And then what happens is Arani and Rhea and Josh, who is known as Tempest later on, basically form the new Doom Patrol with Cliff, who comes later because he wasn't really dead. So Arani and Chief are actually married in the comics, or more so in different versions of Chief and different, you know how comic books are. There's so many different versions and different canons, right? So depending on which, version of Arani and Chief that you find, either they were in love, like, Chief actually loved her, but then he had to leave because there was danger, so he left her in the mountains and whatnot, or he didn't really love her, he was just marrying her in order to save her from being a single woman because that was dangerous at that time. Rita and Mentos are definitely in the comic book. Steve and her were, and also once again, this depends on what version you look at, because in some versions they're very much in love, in other versions Day-In is very manipulative with his powers and how he uses them with Rita, and so it's a point of contention for the two of them. In other versions, he's a little bit more arrogant, but he loves her, and in other versions they love each other and they basically adopt they adopt Beast Boy together, because in some versions of the comic book Rita is actually Gar's adopted mother, like legally his adopted mother. So yeah, so there's different versions of them. And like I said, I thought it was very interesting that they went this particular route of kind of taking him out of the running for being her love interest in this live action version, because in the comics, he's like her kind of sort of consistent, like he was her husband at one time. Like they had a consistent sort of relationship. He was her main love interest for a lot of her versions. And in this one, they basically kind of took that off the table. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go with that, which kind of just reinforces what I think they might be doing with her in Cyborg, but that's neither here nor there in this particular situation. And finally, with Josh, aka Tempest, we saw him in the live action. He didn't display any powers or anything like that. He sort of seemed to have given those up in the live action. But in the comics, he's actually part of the second roster of Doom Patrol, and he has these abilities to have kinetic energy blasts from himself, and he used to be in the military, as it was like referenced by Larry. Also, can we give a shout out to seeing Animal Vegetable Mineral Man? I'm putting this in the comic book section just because he's so from the comics, and they seem to be having it so that he's interwoven within like kind of the backdrop of the live action. And I just love the fact that his like dinosaur head basically bit him in his real head. That was hilarious. That was awesome. And finally, my predictions. I don't know. Okay, so what did you think of this latest episode of the Doom Patrol? Do you agree with my predictions? Do you think Chief has more secrets that will be revealed? What's really good with Larry? What do you think Rita's secret is? What do you think is going to happen? Because I really just don't know. But let me know what you think. Comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. And also, be sure to subscribe so that you are the first to know when I post my videos of all things horror, dark fantasy, and dark superhero. Thanks for watching. Let's get creepy together.